Kunja Bihari. Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivardhari. Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivardhari. Jasoda Nandana Vraja Jana Ranjana. Jasoda Nandana Vraja Jana Ranjana. Yamuna Tira Vonachari. Yamuna Tira Vonachari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Jaya Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivardhari. Jasoda Nandana Vraja Jana Ranjana. Jasoda Nandana Vraja Jana Ranjana. Yamuna Tira Vonachari. Yamuna Tira Vonachari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Jaya Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivardhari. Jasoda Nandana Vraja Jana Ranjana. Jasoda Nandana Vraja Jana Ranjana. Yamuna Tira Vonachari. Yamuna Tira Vonachari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivardhari. Jasoda Nandana Vraja Jana Ranjana. Jasoda Nandana Vraja Jana Ranjana. Tira Vonachari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Nanda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shivasadi Gaur Bhakta Vrinda. Jaya Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shivasadi Gaur Bhakta Vrinda. Jaya Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shivasadi Gaur Bhakta Vrinda. Jaya Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shivasadi Gaur Bhakta Vrinda. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama Hare Hare. Krishna Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama Hare Hare. Krishna, Krishna Krishna Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama Hare Hare. Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada. Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada. Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada. Jai Om Vishnupada Paramahansa Parivrajagacharya Stotara Sata Srimad Divine Grace Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur Maharaj Ki Jai. Jai Om Vishnupada Paramahansa Parivrajagacharya Stotara Sata Srimad Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Goswami Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Ananta Gauti Vaishnava Vrinda Ki Jai. ISKCON Founder Acharya Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Namacharya Srila Haridas Thakur Ki Jai. Prem Shikho Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shri Vasari Gaur Bhaktivinoda Ki Jai. Shri Shri Radha Krishna Gopinath Shama Kunda Radha Kundagiri Govardhana Ki Jai. Shri Shri Vrindavan Dham Ki Jai. Shri Navadvip Dham Ki Jai. Shri Shri Mayapur Dham Ki Jai. Shri Shri Mayapur Dham Ki Jai. Shri Shri Jagannath Puri Ki Jai. Tulasi Devi Ki Jai. Bhakti Devi Ki Jai. Ganga Maya Ki Jai. Jamuna Maya Ki Jai. Gaur Premanandi Hari. Oh, Shama Beta Bhakta Brinda Ki Jai. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to Shri Shri Guru and Shri Gauranga. Narayanam Namaskritam Nairam Chaivam Narotaram Devim Saraswatim Vyasam Tato Jayam Udirayat Nasta Prayeshu Abhajeshu Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya Bhagavati Uttama Shlokir Bhakti Bhavati Naishtiki. Reading from the Srimad Bhagavatam, 3rd Canto, 25th chapter, text number 41. Is that right? Nanyatra Mad Bhagavataha Pradhana Purushe Bharat Atmanaha Sarva Bhutanam Bhayam Tibram Nivartate Nanyatra Mad Bhagavataha Pradhana Purushe Shravrat Atmana Sarva Bhutanam Vayam Tivram Nivartate Nanyatra Mad Bhagavata Pradhana Purushe Bharat Atmana Sarva Bhutanam Vayam Tivram Nivartate Nanyatra Mad Bhagavataha Pradhana Purushe Svarat Atmana Sarva Bhutanam Vayam Tivram Nivartate Nanyatra Mad Bhagavataha Pradhana Purusheshvarat Atmana Sarva Bhutanam Vayam Tivram Nivartate Nanyatra Bhagavat Bhagata Pradhanam Purusheshvarat Atmanam Sarva Bhutanam Vayam Tivram Nivartate Nanyatra Mad Bhagavataha Paradana Purusheshvara Atmana Sarvabhutanam Payam Tibram Nivartate. Ladies? Nanyatra Mad Bhagavataha Paranan Purusheshvara Atmana Sarvabhutanam Mayam Tibram Nivartate. Na, word for word, not. Anyatra, otherwise. Ma, than myself. Bhagavataha, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Pradana Purusha Ishvarati. Pradana Purusha Ishvarat. The Lord of both Prakriti and Purusha. Atmanaha, the soul. Sarvabhutanam, of all living beings. Bhayam, fear. Tivram, terrible. Nivartate, is forsaken. Translation. The terrible fear of birth and death can never be forsaken by anyone who resorts to any shelter other than myself, for I am the Almighty Lord, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, the original source of all creation, and also the Supreme Soul of all souls. Responsively, the terrible fear of birth and death can never be forsaken by anyone who resorts to any shelter other than myself, for I am the Almighty Lord, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, the original source of all creation, and also the Supreme Soul of all souls. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. It is indicated herein that the cycle of birth and death cannot be stopped unless one is a pure devotee of the Supreme Lord. It is said, Harim vina na shritim taranti. One cannot surpass the cycle of birth and death unless one is favored by the Supreme Personality of Godhead. The same concept is confirmed herewith. One may take to the system of understanding the absolute truth by one's own imperfect sensory speculation, or one may try to relate the self by the mystic yoga process. But whatever one may do, unless he comes to the point of surrendering to the Supreme Personality of Godhead, no process can give him liberation. One may ask if this means that those who are undergoing so much penance and austerities by strictly following the rules and regulations are endeavoring in vain. The answer is given by Srimad Bhagavatam 10:2-32, Ye nye vrindaksha vimuktamanina. Lord Brahma and other demigods prayed to the Lord when Krishna was in the womb of Devaki, open quote, "My dear lotus-eyed Lord, there are persons who are puffed up with thought that they have become liberated, or one with God, or have become God. But in spite of thinking in such a puffed up way, their intelligence is not laudable. They are less intelligent." Close quote. It is stated that their intelligence, whether high or low, is not even purified. In purified intelligence, a living entity cannot think otherwise than to surrender. Bhagavad Gita therefore confirms that purified intelligence arises in the person of a very wise man. Bahunam janmanam ante Jnanavam mam prapadyante. After many, many births, one who is actually advanced in intelligence surrenders to the Supreme Lord. Without the surrendering process, one cannot achieve liberation. The Bhagavatam says, open quote, those who are simply puffed up, thinking themselves liberated by some non-devotional process, are not polished or clear in intelligence, for they have not yet surrendered unto you. In spite of executing all kinds of austerities and penances, or even arriving at the brink of spiritual realization in Brahman realization, they think that they are in the effulgence of Brahman. But actually, because they have no transcendental activities, they fall down to material activities. Close quote. One should not be satisfied simply with knowing that one is Brahman. He must engage himself in the service of the Supreme Brahman. That is bhakti. Bhakti is italicized. The engagement of Brahman should be the service of Para Brahman. It is said that unless one becomes Brahman, one cannot serve Brahman. The Supreme Brahman is the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and the living entity is also Brahman. Without realization that he is Brahman, spirit soul, an eternal servitor of the Lord, if one simply thinks that he is Brahman, his realization is only theoretical. He has to realize and at the same time engage himself in the devotional service of the Lord. Then he can exist in the Brahman status. Otherwise, he falls down. The Bhagavatam says that because non-devotees neglect the transcendental loving service of the lotus feet of the personality of Godhead, their intelligence is not sufficient, and therefore these persons fall down. The living entity must have some activity. If he does not engage in activity of transcendental service, he must fall down to material activity. As soon as one falls down to material activity, there is no rescue from the cycle of birth and death. It is stated here by Lord Kapila, open quote, without my mercy, close quote, nanyatra mad bhagavataha. The Lord is stated here to be Bhagavata, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, indicating that he is full of all opulences and is therefore perfectly competent to deliver one from the cycle of birth and death. He is called Pradhana because he is the Supreme. He is equal to everyone, but one who surrenders to him is especially favorable. He is especially favorable. It is also confirmed in Bhagavad Gita that the Lord is equal to everyone. No one is his enemy, and no one is his friend. But to one who surrenders unto him, he is especially inclined. By the grace of the Lord, simply by surrendering unto him, one can get out of this cycle of birth and death. Otherwise, one may go on in many, many lives and may many times attempt other processes for liberation. The verse again, the terrible fear of birth and death can never be forsaken by anyone who resorts to any shelter other than myself. For I am the Almighty Lord, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, the original source of all creation, and also the Supreme Soul of all souls. Om Agena Timirandasya Garanjana Salakaya Chaksur Unmilitam Jena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Sri Chaitanya Manobhistam Stapitam Jena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Karamaham Dharati Swaparantikam. People often ask, if God is all good, has no friends or enemies, why is there evil in the world? Why are there murderers, thieves, pilferers, and perverts of all description? So that touches on the subject of free will. Once upon a time, when Prabhupada was flying in an airplane, the pilot, having put the airplane on automatic pilot, came and sat next to Prabhupada. And as a pilot, he had this question in his mind, the same question, why, if God is all good, why is there evil in the world? And in a very concise and incomplete way, Prabhupada answered, well, you know, as an airplane pilot, I can explain things. First of all, evil might be said to be the backside of God. So he kind of understood that, and he accepted that. But then Prabhupada went on to say, so when you're flying from west to east, you experience day and night. Of course, an airplane can only fly for 13 hours. But if you kept going, you would experience day and night. But you also have the free will to fly. I mean, most airline pilots do. Some don't. But you might be flying from east to west. And if you do that, you're doing what some people in the airline industry say they are chasing the sun. So if the airplane pilot is flying on and on and on from east to west, he never sees night. He only sees sunlight. So that made it a little bit clearer for him to understand. Although it wasn't the complete explanation, as a person who did a lot of flying, he could understand that there is such a thing as always good and such a thing as evil. So it kind of touches on the question of free will. Do we have free will to murder? Do we have free will to steal? Do we have free will to be a pervert? Do we have free will to exploit other people? Do we have free will? And that question arises: is if God, as is said in the purport here, is the ultimate controller, and nothing can exist without Him. How can there be evil? How can people misuse their free will to such a degree that they can become criminals? So this is explained by Prabhupada that we do have, all of us, even those who are atheists, have free will. We have free will to be theists. We have free will to be atheists. But if we decide to be atheistic and criminally inclined, we're taking a great risk. And the example he sometimes used was if we're driving in a country that says you have to keep to the right, like in North America and in some countries, but you decide to drive on the other side of the street, on the left side, you're taking a great risk. You could have a head-on collision with another car. You have the free will to do it, but you're taking a great risk. You're skating on thin ice. You're taking a great risk. And then in countries where driving on the left is the law, like in England and in India, but you use your free will to drive on the right side of the street, you're also taking a great risk. You're using your free will to drive on the other side of the road, but it's dangerous. You could die. You could have a head-on collision, and it's just not done. And I mean, if sane people are obeying the law, that's what they do. They stay on either the left or the right according to what the law is dictating. So that explanation kind of helps to satisfy the pilot that we have free will, and everything, even a blade of grass doesn't move without the sanction of the Supreme Lord. But He does create free will, and the free will can be misused or properly used. So this is a very pregnant kind of purport. It covers a lot of philosophy, of which Prabhupada used to travel, I think, with Mahabharata and other books of Vishwanath Chakravarti and other people. So he got pearls of wisdom, and he put them into some of his purports. So without reading the whole Mahabharata, which is a very, very long treatise, it can occupy sometimes 12 volumes, big books, like this size, 12 of them or more. He would just extract the certain important parts of it. And he said that there was a book called the Characters of the Mahabharata, which goes into a little bit more detailed explanation of the character of some of these great souls who are in the Mahabharata. You know, it's very difficult for a person who is atheistic to become theistic. And at one time, when Britain was the empire of the world, there was the Roman Empire, there was the Carthaginian Empire, there was, of course, the British Empire, which is no more, and the American Empire is pretty much on its way out. I was a missionary in England, and I spent most of my time in London. And in typical London bureaucracy, people who were from another country were not given permanent visas. Like every 6 months or every half year, we had to have a meeting with people in the immigration department, and they'd either deny or, you know, they would review us, and they would extend our visas or not extend them. So on one occasion, there were 2 people, and I thought, oh, this is going to be a real difficult session, because there were 3 of us. There was myself, Shamsundar, and Gurudas, and 2 of them. And the one man, Mr. Jordan, I can mention his name now because he's probably no longer alive, and therefore probably unable to sue us, was always very severe and asking very invasive kind of questions. But his partner was different. And at one point, during this question and answer period, he turned to this Mr. Jordan and he said, "Do you know Latin?" And I said, I was thinking to myself, why is he saying such a thing? And then he quoted some long verse in Latin which said, "Peace on earth, goodwill to men." And he quoted the end of the verse says something like, "Hominibus bonae voluntatis." And he said that, literally translated, that means peace on earth to men of goodwill. And then he looked at us, and he looked back at Mr. Jordan, and before Mr. Jordan could say anything, he said, he looked back at us and he said, "And I think we need more of it." And then Mr. Jordan said, "Okay, that's enough, Nigel, enough talk." So he kind of indirectly was saying that you should give these guys a break. Don't be so, put aside your imperialistic, very conservative, bureaucratic way of questioning, and give these guys a break. They are, he was saying indirectly, these are men of goodwill. And then this other man stopped him, and he continued with his very invasive series of questions, and we answered with our very evasive ways of saying that we were okay. But we kind of both knew that we were playing the game, that if we said the right things and he said the right things, that we would get our visas renewed. And then he did renew them with the warning that, well, maybe next time you come, I'm not going to renew it. So he kept us in a sort of state of suspense. But he didn't really have any objection to Americans coming and invading their country. So that was one case. And then there was another case where, we were the first temple we had in London was very place, and that was after a year of walking the streets of cold, dreary, wet London, and looking at signs that said "for let" or "for sale," and in every case, when I phoned, they wanted money up front, so that was impossible. And then one day, as Krishna somehow arranged it, there was a gentleman, as Gurudas was going into the bank in which we patronized. It was called the Chartered Bank of London. He met a man who was an American, and he was the superintendent of a building that one of the devotees lived in the Haight-Ashbury area. And he said, "Well, I have a building, and you guys can just move in straight away. You don't have to pay any money. You can just move in there." And what we didn't realize is that there was a lot more to it than that. We had to get planning permission, we had to pay the advance money and so on. But anyway, we moved in there. And then later on, we found out that we had to pay and we had to get planning permission. And almost all the people that lived on that block, there were about 40 or 50 people. They were 4 stories high, brick buildings on both sides of the road. And it was only 1 block away from the British Museum, very centrally located. That was the very place. So we kind of doubted that they were going to give us planning permission and that we would have to leave. But one of the devotees had already done a lot of work to the place to make it habitable, to make it into a temple. And we found out later that the government actually owned the building. But this guy that said he owned it, he was like an absentee owner. And the real owners were an estate agent called Stickley and Kent. They don't exist anymore, Stickley and Kent. And the law in that country is kind of like very indirect, very flexible, let's say. So we tried to make friends. I visited all the neighbors, knocked on doors, and there was about 40 people, and we tried to convince them that we were good people, we were stopping drug use, and they shouldn't give us a hard time, and so on. But the government was a little bit more strict. They said, well, we're getting a lot of complaints, and one of our neighbors tried to make a petition against us. It got to that point, and he thought, we found out later that he was not a habitual drunkard. And he thought that we were putting a hex on him because the chaunts, which we got permission to use in the kitchen on the basement, was right adjacent to his ground floor apartment. So he thought that we were putting a hex on him, that we were exercising some kind of witchcraft where they all started coughing because of this chaunts could go through brick walls. So this got to the government, and then one of the devotees went to the government man. It was a gentleman who was dressed in a suit, and he said, well, that's very strange. He said, I think I'm going to have to come over. And so he was sent by the government to come over to try to pacify the arrogant neighbor, this drunkard. And he came in, so we had a meeting with this neighbor, and about 5 devotees, and this gentleman from the department. It was then called the Department of Building and Works. It's now called the Department of the Environment. They're trying to be a little bit in step with the world. What was originally called British Overseas Air Corporation is now called British Airways. So they're trying their best, but they're no longer an empire. And as we learned when we were there, they started losing one country that they were colonizers of after the other. And now the whole empire is just a few small island nations in the Caribbean. There's a few in the other parts of the world too, but pretty much it's gone. So this man in the suit and the devotees and this irritated neighbor, we started to discuss the whole matter. And then he accused us of witchcraft and making stuff that went through walls and was causing them to grief. And then to cough, and then he, in his very Cockney accent, said something like, don't listen to these people, they're just good talkers. And he decided to bolt out of the room. And as he grabbed the door and pulled it towards him, the doorknob came off, and he almost fell over backwards. And in typical diplomatic British fashion, the government man said, now, Mr. So-and-so, don't get so hot under the collar. So he ended up staying and discussing it. So he said, let's just see what it's like in your flat. Let's take a little journey, and we'll go down. It was on the 3rd floor, I think. We'll go down, and we'll see if the noise is penetrating. It's really keeping you awake at night, like you say. And the food is causing you to cough. And so then all of us were making a little parade from the temple to this guy's apartment outside, and then inside to his apartment, and back to the temple, and 3 or 4 times. And since I was at the back of the line, I told the mridanga players and the kartal players to play quietly when we disappeared. So we were kind of telling little white lies to pacify this madman, and we ended up getting planning permission on the basis that we would only have it for 2 years, and if we were found to violate any of the conditions, we had to leave. So in typically the British empirical fashion, which is no longer an empire, they sent spies to see what we were doing. They said, "Oh, I'm an American," and then one of these guys that said, "Oh, I'm an American," I kind of suspected that he was a spy. So I said to him, "Well, where do you live?" And he said, "Philadelphia." And I said, "Well, that's in California, isn't it?" And he kind of said yes. And then I knew for sure he was a spy because it's just on the other side of the country. Anyway, that didn't amount to anything. And then in the next phase, they sent photographers and videographers on the roof of the buildings across the way to see if we were violating any of the conditions. And then they found out that we were putting more people, we were accommodating more people than they were allowing to live in the building. So, and they were illegal. And they wrote us and they said, "Well, if you continue to do this, we're going to fine you every day." It was like 150 pounds or something like that, every day. And they had a right to do it. He said, "Unless you leave the building, we'll give you 30 days. We're going to fine you 150 pounds. And that was a lot of money in those days. That was like about $250 every day. So that's when we decided we had to get another place. And so that was the condition for about 2.5 or 3 years. That was very place. And these are things that I wrote about a little bit about in A Miracle on 2nd Avenue, but the inside stories are kind of like sleazy. When we occupied the building, it wasn't even possible to get a lease because the law is very flexible in that country. And there was the lawyers that we engaged were called Goodman and Derrick. They still exist. They were the lawyers for the then Prime Minister Harold Wilson. And we thought, well, we're in safe hands. And so the real owners of the building contacted another lawyer who was 2 blocks away, and they made an agreement with Goodman and Derrick. It wasn't a lease. It was just an agreement between 2 legal firms. And that became the lease, and we were able to stay there for a long time. Anyway, there's more interesting stories to tell, but we're running out of time. So any questions that anyone wants to ask about anything, what I've said, or any of this? I'll read the verse again. "The terrible fear of birth and death can never be forsaken by anyone who resorts to any shelter other than myself. I am the Almighty God, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, the original source of all creation, and also the Supreme Soul of all souls." Yes?
So we have Krishna as the supreme controller, but we have some control over whether we surrender or not.
Right.
We endeavor with the devotional process or not. Sometimes I'll feel helpless at the thought that I can't do anything, but surrender in the Bhagavad Gita is described as not putting down the arrow, like the bow and arrow, but picking it up and fighting. This process is confusing and hard most of the time. So how can I deal with that on a day-to-day basis?
Well, if you read regularly and associate with devotees, you will gradually come to the point of surrendering. And you won't have to worry about, whether you're using or abusing your free will. Otherwise, I mean, you're here. So you're already associating with deities and devotees, and you're partway there. So there's no need to be confused. You just have to carry on doing what you're doing. That's my recommendation, anyway.
Thank you.
Anything else? Okay, well, go ahead.
Hare Krishna Maharaj, can you tell us a bit more about what Prabhupada forward about Berry Place and
Well, what he said about Berry Place, when we told him the truth, that it was actually owned by the government, but this other guy was the absentee landlord, then he said, when he found out that the government actually owned the building, then he said, we should buy it. And he said, but tell them we'll only buy it if they give us a good price. And then he paused a little bit, and smiled and then leaned towards me and said, "But buy it at any price." And it so happened that when we went to them and tried to buy it, they said that it wasn't for sale. They just wanted to collect the rents as long as they could. That's the inside story of a corrupt former empire. I mean, I don't mean to diss anybody who's British, but that's the story.
The idea of free will, it seems like we have a very limited amount of free will, isn't it? Because we're under the control of the modes of nature, according to the modes you've been born into, so to speak. So we have a little bit of free will, but not so
Well,
much.
I could tell more people's names, but I'm sort of avoiding that because I want to avoid legal implication. Unless they're very old, most of them have probably passed away, so it's beyond lawsuits. But what was your question?
That actually, how much free will do we have, being that we're born into the modes of nature, and until we surrender to Krishna, we're pretty much like that illustration in the old days of like a person with the strings like a puppet. Seems like that's sort of, we're being jerked around.
Well, there's a kind of extremist view that we're so controlled, even in free will, that we'll never make it. But that's a very controversial position. That illustration of people, are acting like puppets. They're so controlled. But we're trying our best. We're in the temple. We're Hare Krishna devotees. We're worshiping the other devotees and deities. And even if we're willing to wait, even if it takes a few lifetimes. But there are instances where Krishna liberated someone, and not just liberated, but brought a person back to Godhead in this very lifetime. So it's a very it's a very risky process in one sense, and it's a very complicated philosophy. Krishna he makes the laws, but he can break them if he wants to. Just like policemen, if they're chasing a speeder in a car, they sometimes have to break the law to catch them. So Krishna's doing that all the time. He's making laws, he's breaking them, and we just we're doing our best. Anything else? Okay, I think we'll stop there. And if you want to find more about things, I have this book is in the shop. It's called A Miracle on 2nd Avenue. Don't go into all the detail, all the gory details, but it's in there. Because a lot of this isn't in the history books. It's just like that instance where we were checking out our neighbor. That's not in there in detail. Hare Krishna.